collapsed in the bathroom with my face still swollen from crying, and that was the first time in days he called me my love. That day, I couldn't breathe anymore. I had spent the whole morning staring at the kitchen floor, where he had shattered a glass the night before during one of his outbursts. My foot was bleeding a little, but I didn't mention it. I was too busy trying to understand why he had been ignoring me for 3 days. The classic silent treatment. He walked through the house like a stranger, not looking at me, not speaking, as if my existence was an inconvenience, until I broke. Only then would he become affectionate again. That wasn't love. It was narcissistic abuse disguised as pity. He only saw me when I was falling apart. When I smiled, he pulled away. When I achieved something at work, he punished me with distance. When I was doing well, he invented problems. It was like my pain was the price I had to pay for his attention. "You're overreacting as always," he'd say after I begged him to speak to me. That wasn't overreaction. That was gaslighting. That was emotional abuse. One time, we went to a barbecue at his sister's house. I was excited, feeling pretty. He stayed silent the whole drive. There, he ignored me completely and made jokes about me with his cousins. When I walked over, he said, "Not everyone needs to applaud you, you know?" It tore me apart. On the drive back, after I cried silently in the passenger seat, he took my hand and said, "Sorry, I just didn't want you to become unbearable." As if my pain justified the bare minimum of affection. As if I only deserved to be touched when I was broken. His love only showed up after chaos. He told me he loved me when I cried and begged him to come back. He hugged me when I was on my knees, apologizing for things I didn't even understand. That wasn't love. That was manipulation. It was a toxic relationship where there was only room for one star, and I only existed as the background to my own suffering. I remember the night I broke down in front of my parents, saying I couldn't take it anymore. He dragged me to the bedroom, gripped my arm tightly, closed the door, and whispered with fury in my ear, "If you expose me again, I'll disappear from your life." It was fear that kept me there. Fear of him leaving, and fear of him staying, which was worse. Being ignored or being remembered only when I was in pieces. "You're only pretty when you're quiet and sad," he told me once. I never forgot. "If you were happy without me, then what would I be here for?" he said, like it was poetry. I went silent, because deep down, I didn't know anymore either. I was the victim of a cycle he mastered perfectly. Hurt, ignore, reappear as the savior. I lived sick with a love that only breathed when I was suffocating. I became an expert at crying in the shower, at hiding my eye bags, at making excuses. I became small, invisible, disfigured from myself. He only loved me at my worst. And somehow, he made me believe that was love. Now I wake up sometimes, startled, thinking, what if I'm only worthy of love when I'm hurting? What if I've been conditioned to bleed just to be seen? There were days when I'd stand in front of the mirror and wonder if I should cry, just to make him care. Sometimes I did. Quiet tears, timed perfectly before he got home. Not because I was manipulating him, but because I had learned that pain was the only language he responded to. Smiling made me invisible. Stability made me disposable. My joy threatened him. My peace made him cold. The more I healed, the more he vanished. I remember a morning in winter when I was finally okay. I had gotten up early, made coffee, even put on music. I felt light, not happy, not fully, but quiet inside. He came into the kitchen, looked at me humming a song and asked, "Who are you trying to impress?" My stillness enraged him. He needed me fractured, confused, dependent. And when I wasn't, he created a storm. That day, he accused me of cheating. Just like that, out of nowhere. And for hours, he listed every reason why I was suspicious. I kept saying, "That's not true." But my voice started shaking. He won. Again. That's how psychological abuse works. It's not loud. It's in the erasure of who you are. It's in the way they confuse you, isolate you, then show just enough softness to make you doubt your reality. I stopped trusting my gut. I stopped telling friends. I stopped making plans. I stopped existing outside of him. And he loved that version of me. The ghost. The girl with no voice, no boundaries, no light. He would never admit it, but he fed off my trauma. The worse I felt, the more control he had. And the more control he had, the safer I became his mirror, reflecting only his needs, his ego, his emotions. Mine didn't matter, unless they broke me. Then suddenly, I became worthy of attention. That's the twisted logic of a narcissist. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a victim he could rescue from the wounds he caused. Sometimes I still hear his voice when I'm too quiet. Don't get used to being okay, it whispers. You're only lovable when you're broken. And I hate that part of me, the one that still looks for him in the silence, the one that still wonders if being happy will always come with a cost, if love, real love, will ever feel safe, or if the damage he left is permanent. He only loved me when I was hurting. And some days, I still don't know how not to hurt. He used to say I was too intense, but only when I was happy. When I laughed too loud at dinner with his friends, he'd place his hand gently on my leg, not with affection, but with a coded warning. A reminder, tone it down. If I wore something that made me feel confident, he'd raise an eyebrow and say, "You sure about that?" Every time I started to feel alive again, he made sure to extinguish it, slowly, subtly, with the kind of emotional abuse that doesn't leave bruises, just invisible cracks no one else can see. He was never aggressive. He was careful, calculated. The charming kind of narcissist that everyone loved at parties. The one who helped your mom with the groceries, complimented your best friend, asked your cousin about their dog. Everyone said, "You're so lucky to have him." And I nodded, smiling, swallowing the scream that lived inside me, because they didn't see the version of him that only existed behind closed doors. Like the night I got a promotion. I came home excited, carrying a bottle of wine and takeout from his favorite place. He barely looked up from his phone. I told him the news, and he smiled, but something shifted in his eyes. Cold, flat, detached. 20 minutes later, he started a fight about the dishes. Said I was becoming lazy, that I was too full of myself lately. And by midnight, I was sobbing on the kitchen floor, apologizing for things I didn't even understand. He only touched my face to wipe the tears he caused. "I just want the real you back," he whispered that night. But what he meant was the broken version, the one who doubted herself, the one he could mold and remold whenever he needed to feel powerful. That was his addiction, control, and he'd do anything, say anything, to keep it. The truth is, I became his emotional puppet. He'd disappear emotionally for days, withholding affection, conversations, even eye contact, until I collapsed into despair. Then suddenly, he was kind. He'd make tea, ask if I'd eaten, offer a massage, and I'd fall for it, every time. Not because I was naive, but because I was trauma-bonded, because I mistook relief for love, because I had learned that kindness only came after suffering. It's the most dangerous part of narcissistic abuse, the way it rewires your brain. You start to crave the high of reconciliation, no matter the cost. You become addicted to the cycle, tension, explosion, silence, tenderness, over and over, like a sick emotional roller coaster you never agreed to ride. And he always made sure to say the perfect things when I was at my lowest. "No one else will love you like I do. You're just too much for other people. I understand you better than anyone." Those weren't compliments. They were cages, beautifully decorated, deceptively warm. And I believed him. For too long, I believed that love meant pain, that connection required surrender, that being seen meant being destroyed first. He weaponized my empathy, my softness, my desire to fix. He knew I would never walk away while he was hurting, so he stayed hurt, just enough to keep me from leaving, always just one step away from healing, always just broken enough to seem like he needed me. It wasn't real vulnerability. It was manipulation. It was survival for him, and destruction for me. The worst part? I started to hurt myself, just to feel closer to him. I'd skip meals, cancel plans, stop creating art. I shrank my world to match his darkness, because I thought maybe if I broke myself down enough, he'd finally love me fully, completely. But narcissists don't fall in love with you. They fall in love with your pain, your reflection of their wounds, your willingness to bleed for them, over and over. The day I realized that was the day I stopped speaking. It was during an argument about something stupid. Laundry, maybe. He was calm. I wasn't. I asked a question, and he looked straight at me and said, "You're exhausting when you feel things too much." Something in me shattered. I remember walking out to the balcony, closing the sliding glass door, and staring at the street below, not thinking of jumping, just wondering how many versions of me had died in that apartment. I stopped speaking for 3 days, not because I was giving him the silent treatment, but because I couldn't find my voice anymore. I had screamed so much into emotional voids, whispered so many truths into deaf ears, cried so often into empty rooms. My body just shut down. Silence became my final act of rebellion, or maybe my only form of protection. And guess what? He started being sweet again, attentive, present. "I miss your laugh," he said one night. "Come back to me." But he didn't miss me. He missed the version of me he could undo. That's when it finally clicked. He didn't love me when I was happy, healthy, or healing. He only loved me when I was hurting, because that's when I was easiest to control. And now, even far away from him, I still flinch when someone says, "You look happy," because a part of me still wonders, is that the moment love will be taken away again? Some nights, I still find myself apologizing in my sleep. It's like my body doesn't know he's gone. Like my nervous system is still waiting for the next cold silence, the next quiet punishment, the next storm hidden behind a smile. That's what trauma does. It lingers. It embeds itself in the way you pour coffee, answer messages, laugh too carefully. I carry his voice in my head like a second skin, not because I want to, but because psychological abuse doesn't end when the relationship does. It echoes. He trained me to fear joy. If a day felt too light, I'd brace myself. If someone complimented me, I'd shrink. If I started to believe I was enough, I'd hear his voice again. "Don't get ahead of yourself." I can't count how many times he said that. Every time I grew, every time I tried, every time I shined, he'd cut me down gently, just enough to confuse me. That was his specialty. Gaslighting wrapped in concern. Control masked as love. I remember once, during a vacation with his family, I wore a swimsuit I loved. I hadn't worn it in years. I finally felt comfortable in my body again. At lunch, while everyone laughed and shared stories, he leaned in and whispered, "You're really brave wearing that around my brothers." That's all. One sentence. But it burned. I spent the rest of the day covered in a towel, doubting myself, scanning their eyes for judgment that probably wasn't there. He didn't need to yell. His control was silent, precise. I didn't understand it then, but now I do. He didn't need to destroy me loudly. He just needed to plant doubt. That's the power of a narcissist. They don't break you all at once. They erode you. They chip away at your worth until you start doing the work for them, until you become your own critic, your own punisher, your own jailer. I started anticipating his moods before he even walked in the door. I learned to read his silences like road maps. I knew the signs, the way he'd sigh, the pause before answering, the fake smile in front of friends. Each one meant a storm was coming, and I'd already be preparing my apology. I became so used to begging for crumbs that I forgot what it was like to be full. He never once asked what I needed. He never cared how I felt. My emotions were too much, manipulative, or drama. But his silence, his shutdowns, his jealousy and accusations, those were always justified. In his world, I was the unstable one. He was the reasonable man trying to handle me, and I almost believed him. Almost. Until the day I stopped apologizing. It wasn't a big moment. No fight, no climax. Just an ordinary afternoon. I was sitting on the couch folding laundry. He walked in, tossed his keys on the table and sighed. The same old sigh. I asked gently, "Are you okay?" He didn't answer, just stared at me, then said flatly, "I miss when you used to be softer." And something inside me snapped. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't chase him into his silence. I just stood up, walked into the bedroom, and locked the door. And for the first time in years, I didn't apologize. That silence, mine, was different. It wasn't submission. It was self-preservation. It was the beginning of me choosing myself, even in tiny, trembling steps. And he hated it, because a narcissist can't handle a woman who no longer bleeds on command. The unraveling didn't happen overnight. It took months. But that was the moment I realized, if someone only loves you when you're in pain, they don't love you. They love the power they feel over your suffering. It's been over a year since I left. I still flinch when someone raises their voice. I still over-explain. I still wake up with the urge to say sorry for things I didn't do. But now, I catch myself. I pause. I breathe. I remind myself, you are not broken for needing love. You were just taught to find it in the fire. And some nights, when I cry, and I still do. I let the tears fall without shame, not to be seen, not to be comforted, but because they're mine now. He only loved me when I was hurting, but I'm learning to love myself when I'm healing, even if it's slow, even if it still hurts, even if the silence now comes with peace, not fear. Healing is quieter than I thought it would be. No fireworks, no grand revenge. Just me, in my small apartment, learning how to exist without looking over my shoulder. Some days, I don't trust the calm. I wait for the crash, even though he's no longer here. That's what a toxic relationship does. It rewires your brain to expect punishment after peace. I used to walk on eggshells so often that now, even in an empty room, I still watch where I step. I remember standing in the grocery store one day, frozen in front of the yogurt aisle, because I didn't know what kind I actually liked. He always chose for me. I thought it was love, that he knew me so well. He wanted to make things easier, but now I see it for what it was. Control disguised as care. I wasn't allowed to have preferences. Even small choices were slowly stolen from me. It was never about yogurt. It was about identity. And he dismantled mine, piece by piece, until all that was left was the version of me he created, one that served him, flattered him, feared him. There was a time I believed that was normal, that being a victim of love was just part of being difficult to love. He planted that seed early. Every time I stood up for myself, he'd say, "No wonder your ex left you," or, "This is why people give up on you." I didn't realize it was emotional abuse. I thought I really was too much. I even thanked him once for putting up with me. The shame of that moment still burns in my throat, but it wasn't just shame. It was confusion. He was the one who taught me to hate myself, then offered comfort when I collapsed under the weight of it. Manipulation so precise I didn't even know I was being hurt. I just thought I was hard to love. There was a night, maybe a month before I left, when he found me crying in the bathroom with the lights off. I had been there for hours, holding my breath, afraid to make noise. He knocked softly and said, "Why do you always make yourself the victim?" That sentence gutted me, not because it was cruel, but because it was familiar. He had said it before, and every time I believed it a little more. But that night, I didn't answer. I just looked up at the mirror in the dim light and saw a version of myself I didn't recognize. Hollow-eyed, small, silent. That wasn't a victim. That was a woman buried under years of narcissistic abuse. After I left, people said I was brave, but I didn't feel brave. I felt lost, numb, like I'd stepped out of a war zone with no map, no name, no idea how to be a person again. The world felt too big. Choices felt dangerous. Love felt like a trap. Because when someone only shows affection after they hurt you, you start to associate love with suffering. And even now, when someone is kind to me for no reason, I tense up. I wonder what I did to earn it, or what they'll want in return. That's the long tail of psychological abuse. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It stays. It poisons your reflection, makes you doubt your healing, makes you miss the cage because at least it was familiar. Sometimes I still miss him, or at least the version of him I tried to believe was real, the one who brought me soup when I was sick, who kissed my forehead, who said, "You're my home." But now I know, that version only existed when I was hurting. He loved me most when I was small, sad, silent, because a narcissist doesn't fall in love with your soul. He falls in love with your weakness, the parts he can bend, break, and rebuild into his own design. I wasn't in love. I was in survival mode, mistaking relief for romance. And now, as I rebuild myself slowly, I still grieve. Not just the relationship, but the years I spent convincing myself that pain was proof of passion, that being loved meant being diminished, that I was only worthy when I was wounded. The truth is, he only loved me when I was hurting, and I kept hurting so he would love me. That is the deepest betrayal, the one I committed against myself. But I'm not hers anymore, the girl who begged to be seen. I'm still finding out who I am without him. And some days, that means crying over yogurt in the grocery store. Other days, it means laughing for no reason and not apologizing for it. Healing isn't loud, but neither is freedom. And little by little, I'm learning how to live in both. The first time someone touched me gently after him, I flinched. Not because I was afraid of the new man's hand, but because my body still remembered that tenderness always came after destruction. That was the rhythm he taught me. Pain first, comfort second. Love was the apology. Love was the band-aid. Love was never the constant, only the reward for enduring him. I didn't know how to accept care that wasn't preceded by cruelty, so I pulled away and whispered, "I'm sorry," before I even realized it. The man looked confused. "You didn't do anything," he said, but inside my stomach was turning. Because in a toxic relationship, you're trained to believe your presence is a burden, that you need permission to take up space, that being loved without suffering is suspicious. Even now, in safety, I wait for punishment that never comes. That's what narcissistic abuse does. It infects time. It creates a version of you that lives on, even after the narcissist is gone. I still hear his sighs when I speak too long. I still second-guess texts before sending them. I still apologize when I laugh too loudly. And when someone calls me beautiful, my first instinct is to explain why I'm not. Because he made me believe love had to be earned with pain. He built that belief slowly, carefully, like a craftsman of confusion. He'd start fights just before my birthday, ignore me after I got good news, flirt with other women when I dressed up, and when I cried, that's when he came alive. "I'm here for you. See? I never leave when you're low. I love all your broken parts." It sounded poetic, until I realized he only showed up after he knocked me down, and I kept thanking him for helping me up. That's the twisted intimacy of emotional abuse. You start to feel closer to the person who's hurting you, because they're also the one who gives you relief. They cause the wound, then offer the bandage, over and over, until you stop seeing the wound at all, until the bandage becomes the proof that they care. I lived in that cycle for years, and the sickest part? I thought it meant we were soulmates. "Real love isn't easy," he'd say. "We just feel things deeper than other people. You and I, we're chaos, but it's our chaos." It sounded romantic. It was hell. There were moments I thought I was going insane. I'd say, "That hurt me," and he'd reply, "You're too sensitive." I'd say, "That didn't happen," and he'd insist it did, with so much confidence that I started questioning my own memory. That's gaslighting. That's psychological abuse. That's the slow death of self-trust. And when your intuition dies, you follow their truth. You live in their reality. You become a shadow in your own body. I didn't even realize how much of myself I had erased until I left. After I walked away, I couldn't remember my favorite songs. I didn't know what made me laugh. I couldn't answer simple questions like, "What do you want?" because I hadn't been allowed to want anything, except him, his mood, his approval, his attention. And what's worse is, he made me feel lucky for it. Lucky that he stayed. Lucky that he forgave me when I acted out. Lucky that he chose me, even though I was so much. But here's what I know now. I was never too much. I was just too awake for someone who needed me blind. He couldn't handle a woman who saw through the illusion, so he broke me until my sight blurred. But eventually, something inside me, quiet, buried, stubborn, whispered, "You deserve to be loved when you're smiling, not just when you're sobbing." And that whisper grew, until one day it became a voice, then a decision, then an exit. Now, on the other side, I still carry the scars. I still have days where I confuse safety with boredom, where I miss the chaos, not because it was good, but because it was familiar. That's the sickness of trauma. It makes the nightmare feel like home. But every time I stay kind to myself, every time I choose calm, I undo a little more of his damage. He only loved me when I was hurting, but I am slowly learning to love myself when I'm whole. And one day, maybe not yet, maybe not soon, I'll meet someone who doesn't flinch at my light. And this time, I won't dim it to keep them close. The first time I laughed without fear, it felt foreign in my own mouth, like a language I had once spoken fluently but forgot over time. I was at a cafe alone, reading something silly on my phone, and for a moment, I forgot to monitor myself. I laughed, out loud, freely, from my chest. No one stared. No one sighed. No one said, "Can you not be so loud?" And in that tiny moment, I realized this was mine. This piece belonged to me. There was no narcissist hovering with cold eyes, no silent treatment brewing just beneath the surface, no emotional transaction waiting to be completed. Just me, breathing, laughing, existing without fear of punishment. And that small freedom, that ordinary moment, made my eyes well up. Because for so long, Every part of me had been filtered through him. He decided what emotions were allowed. He decided when I was too much or not enough. He held the leash so tight I forgot I had legs of my own. That's what control looks like. Not always chains. Sometimes just rules so invisible you stop noticing you're obeying them. I remember how he'd say things like, "You're better when you're calm," or "People like you more when you're quiet." And I internalized it. I thought I was doing the world a favor by disappearing, by becoming small, agreeable, palatable. I thought love required that I disappear to make room for someone else's comfort. But that wasn't love. That was submission. That was manipulation. And he did it so subtly. He never screamed. He never raised a hand. He just unmade me, moment by moment, until I became the version of me he could tolerate. And the scariest part? I thanked him for it. I called it growth. I called it maturity. I thought he was helping me become better, when in truth, I was just becoming easier to control. That's how narcissistic abuse works. It's not always fire. Sometimes it's ice. Sometimes it's the absence of warmth, the calculated withdrawal of attention, the way they disappear just long enough to make you beg, then return just in time to remind you who you belong to. He had this ability to vanish emotionally. We'd be in the same room, breathing the same air, and I'd feel like a ghost. No eye contact, no words, just silence heavy enough to collapse a body. And every time I asked, "What's wrong?" he'd say, "You're imagining things. You're too needy. You're starting again." That's gaslighting. It's not just lies. It's the slow erasure of your sanity. It's the way they turn your questions into evidence against you. It's the way you start to believe your own voice is dangerous. There were nights I stared at the ceiling, rehearsing conversations I never got to have. Nights I wrote him messages I deleted before sending. Nights I cried silently into my pillow, because even my pain had to be quiet enough to protect his comfort. And every now and then, when the pain broke through my silence, that's when he'd hold me. That's when he'd stroke my hair and say, "I'm here." But he wasn't comforting me. He was reestablishing power. He needed me broken to feel whole. He didn't love me. He loved my wounds. He loved the version of me that bent, that apologized, that stayed. He only loved me when I was hurting. And somehow, I began to believe that love and pain were twins, born from the same wound, inseparable. Even now, when someone says they care about me, my instinct is to pull back, to search for the price tag, to scan for the trap, because what he taught me wasn't love. It was a transaction, and I paid for it with my joy, my voice, my self-worth. But every day I wake up and choose to stay kind to myself. I reclaim a little piece of what he tried to steal. I choose breakfast even when I feel hollow. I choose rest without guilt. I choose softness without apology. Because now I know, love is not supposed to make you vanish. Love is not supposed to hurt more than it heals. Love doesn't ask you to break just to be held. He only loved me when I was hurting. But I'm learning to live in a world where I don't have to be in pain to deserve softness. Where my joy doesn't come with consequences. Where my voice doesn't echo into silence. Some nights, I still wake up expecting him to be there, in the corner of the room, in the chill of the air, in the pause before my breath. But all I find is myself, and I am learning. That is enough. Somewhere deep down, I think I always knew. He never loved me. He loved the version of me that was easiest to dismantle. The quiet girl. The girl who questioned herself. The girl who mistook his coldness for depth, his punishments for passion, his possessiveness for protection. He loved me most when I was crying on the bathroom floor, when I was doubting my worth, when I was too numb to speak, when I forgot how to smile without permission. And every time I tried to rise, he reminded me who I used to be. He pulled me back into the dark with words that sounded like truth. You were happier when you needed me. No one else would love you this way. You're only safe when you're with me. But it wasn't safety. It was captivity. It was a world built on fear, silence, and confusion, where he got to be God, and I got to disappear. He only loved me when I was hurting, and I kept hurting just to feel loved. That's the kind of emotional abuse no one talks about, the kind that wears a smile in public, the kind that looks like romance in the beginning, and ends with you forgetting your own name. I survived him. But sometimes, survival comes with ghosts. Like when I double-check my tone in a text, or stare too long in the mirror, trying to remember what I used to look like before the damage. Or when someone says, "I love you," and I flinch, because part of me still wonders what kind of pain will follow this time. He made love feel like a threat. And now, even peace feels suspicious. That's the echo he left in me. But still, I get up. I make coffee. I play music. I laugh, even when it feels unnatural, because healing isn't pretty. It's not linear. It's trembling hands learning how to hold joy again. One day, I'll look back at the girl I was with him, and I'll forgive her. Not for staying, but for believing that pain was the price of love. Because now I know, real love doesn't hide in silence. Real love doesn't punish truth. Real love doesn't need you to break in order to stay. He only loved me when I was hurting, and I don't belong to that version of myself anymore. But some nights, I still hear him in the quiet. And I wonder if he hears me too. Not my voice, but the absence of it.